Today, we are going to discuss the built-in compliance in Red Hat ACS. My name is Aleš Nosek, and I'm the software practitioner located in San Diego, California, helping you navigate the world of Kubernetes. This video is part of a series about Red Hat ACS. I will have links to all parts of this series down below the video. Red Hat ACS supports several compliance benchmarks. It provides automated tests that allow you to assess the compliance of your environment. For a single benchmark control, there can be several tests that Red Hat ACS performs. Not all benchmark controls can be reasonably automated. After you evaluate your environment using Red Hat ACS, you will still need to put in more effort to fully complete the assessment. There are two different compliance implementations used in Red Hat ACS. There is the built-in compliance, and then there is the compliance operator. In this video, we are going to focus on the built-in compliance. We'll talk about the compliance operator in the follow-up video. The built-in compliance implementation is part of the Red Hat ACS codebase. The compliance checks are implemented in Golang. The built-in compliance supports the following compliance standards. It is the CIS benchmarks for Docker and CIS benchmarks for Kubernetes. Note that the CIS benchmarks for Docker are not applicable to OpenShift. OpenShift uses CRI-O as its container runtime and not Docker. CIS benchmarks for Kubernetes are suitable for scanning vanilla Kubernetes clusters, but based on my experience, they are not a good fit for scanning OpenShift. For scanning OpenShift, you can use the CIS benchmarks for OpenShift that are provided by the compliance operator. I will be demonstrating the CIS benchmarks for OpenShift in the follow-up video. The other supported benchmarks are HIPAA, NIST, and PCI DSS. The checks can be divided into three categories, and you will see them in the resulting compliance report. The first category are the cluster checks that evaluate the global cluster configuration. These checks mainly look at the Kubernetes objects that can be retrieved through Kubernetes APIs, and there is also some little evidence which needs to be downloaded from the Kubernetes nodes. Next are the node checks. Node checks evaluate the configuration of Kubernetes nodes, and these checks are executed on each of the cluster nodes. The last category are the deployment checks. These checks look at the Kubernetes objects of type deployment. That means kinds deployment, deployment configs, stateful sets, and so on. And so these checks evaluate the configuration of the workloads which are running on your cluster. Note that even when many Kubernetes objects are evaluated during the compliance scan, there are no Kubernetes API calls made. Instead, all the objects are already collected in the Red Hat ACS database, and the scans will just grab them from there. The built-in compliance doesn't support any parametrization of the scanning process. This is in contrast to the compliance operator that we'll be talking about in the follow-up video. The compliance operator comes with profile tailoring, and this profile tailoring can be used to parameterize the scanning process. The built-in compliance doesn't support automated remediation of the issues found, and this is also in contrast to the compliance operator that does have this functionality. In the next section of the video, I will demonstrate a practical use of the Red Hat ACS built-in compliance. In this video, I'm using Red Hat ACS version 4.3.3. Compliance can be found in the menu on the left side. Since I have never run a compliance scan, there are no results available yet. The scan can be triggered by the Scan Environment button. Red Hat ACS will scan all clusters connected to it. In my case, this is just one cluster. The scan is now complete. I can review the scan results for any of the 6 compliance standards. I can browse the scan results directly in the web UI. For example, the CIS Kubernetes standard. I can take a look at the individual controls here of this standard. And for each control, I can also take a look what was the scan result in my environment. In addition to that, I can also download a scan report in the CSV format under Export and Download Evidence as CSV. If I open the report, I can see that it contains a laundry list of checks that were performed in my environment. For each check, I can see which standard and which standard control this check verifies. I can see what type of object this check is geared towards. In this case, the first check is geared towards checking a cluster, so it is a cluster-wide check. However, at the bottom here, I can see that there are also some checks which are actually checking cluster nodes. Because this is a cluster check, then I can, in the object name, see the name of the cluster that we are checking. The check result can be found in the state column. In this case, we are looking at a failed check, which means that in this point, my environment is not compliant with the standard. The evidence column provides more information on why the check failed. This information helps me with figuring out what do I need to modify in my environment so that it becomes compliant. After modifying my environment, I would run the compliance scan again to get the new results. Let's review what we covered in this video. The Red Hat ACS built-in compliance supports the following compliance standards. It supports the CIS benchmarks for Docker and CIS benchmarks for Kubernetes. It also supports HIPAA, NIST, and the PCI DSS compliance standards. The CIS benchmarks provided by the Red Hat ACS built-in compliance are not a good fit for scanning OpenShift clusters. Instead, for scanning OpenShift, you should use the CIS benchmarks for OpenShift provided by the compliance operator. The Red Hat ACS built-in compliance can scan all clusters at the same time. While scanning, it executes the checks, which can be divided into 3 categories. The cluster checks inspect the global configuration of the cluster by checking the Kubernetes API resources. The node checks inspect the configuration on the cluster nodes, on the file system of the cluster nodes. And the deployment checks inspect the configuration of the deployments of the workloads running on the cluster. The check results can be exported in a CSV format. In this CSV, you can find a column called Evidence, where you can find more detailed information about why a given check failed. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Please feel free to leave your questions or comments down below. If you found this video helpful, please consider subscribing. Until next time.